Changes coming to Washington after a pair of historic Senate wins in Georgia's runoff races. Last week, Reverend Raphael Warnock secured his win against former incumbent Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, and 33-year-old Jon Ossoff defeated his GOP opponent, former Senator David Perdue. Warnock is the first elected black Democratic senator from the South, while Ossoff will be Georgia's first Jewish senator and youngest Democrat to serve in the upper chamber since Joe Biden. The win means Democrats will control the White House, Senate, and the House at the start of the Biden administration. The news also came the same day pro-Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building in a deadly attack. To help us unpack all of this, I want to bring in Reverend William J. Barber II. He is the president and senior lecturer of Repairers of the Breach. Reverend, good to see you. Both Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff's opponents were very aggressive in labeling them as radical and linking them to anti-Semitism. Why did those baseless attacks fail to stick in the election?
Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, those are just old tropes that have been used in the South to divide black and white people. Their opponents just decided to pick those up. You can go back and get those same things from George Wallace and Lester Maddox. But what they really were trying to do is to keep Georgians from hearing the agenda of Warnock and Ossoff. You know, Georgia, 48% of Georgians are poor and low wealth. 1.9 million people in Georgia make less than a living wage. 1 million people don't have health care. And they didn't want people to hear, but they could not stop it. In fact, they did hear it. They knew, our opponents knew, that these southern states are really not red states. They've not been red states for a long time. They've been states that Democrats have not fully fought in. They've been states that have not been organized. They've been states that we've not really focused on. But since 2008, when Obama broke through in North Carolina, and we showed what a moral fusion coalition of black and white and brown people could do, the South has been ripe. And so they knew that, number one, they had mobilization, they had the right message to talk to poor and low wealth people who could change the outcome of the election. And when I say poor and white, I mean black, white, and brown. And they had the money. And when you put those three things together, you can move mountains in the South and change the direction of this country.
Well, speaking of moving mountains, Senator-elect Raphael Warnock is only the second black senator from the South since Reconstruction, and Senator-elect Jon Ossoff is a 33-year-old Jewish man, the first from Georgia. Can you walk us through the symbolism of having both of these two men headed to Washington to represent Georgia?
Yes, you know, the first senator from the South, he wasn't elected, he was appointed, was the one that replaced the former so-called president of the Confederacy. His name was Hiram Rebels. He was actually from North Carolina. He was appointed from Mississippi. Then you had Tim Scott, but now you have Warnock, and there's a big difference between Scott and Warnock, for instance. Scott is black, but he has chosen to stand with the Tea Party. He has chosen to stand against fixing the Voting Rights Act. He's chosen to stand against expanding health care. He's chosen to stand against living wages. He's chosen to stand in those ways. Warnock is very different. It's not just the color of his skin, it's the message of his policies. That's why he attracted this coalition of black and brown and white people. We have to understand, if every black person in Georgia had voted, that's still only 29% of the electorate. So this electorate is a victory of fusion coalition, the same kind of fusion we saw in the 1800s post the Civil War that changed the South and changed the nation and brought us the 14th and 15th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Warnock is in that tradition. He's in that tradition because he ran as a Democrat. He didn't run as Republican light. He ran on policies saying, elect me and elect Ossoff. And we're going to deal with systemic racism and policy. We're going to deal with living wages. We're going to expand health care. And that's huge to see an African-American and a Jewish brother run on a progressive agenda in the South and prove that you can, in fact, win by doing that. This should mark, hopefully, a very new day in the way Democrats and others approach the South going forward.
So, after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, I want to show our viewers what you tweeted. What we saw today in the U.S. Capitol was un-American, based on our Constitution, but it was not non-American because oppressed people have seen this kind of mob violence many times before in this country. Unwrap that for our viewers.
You know, there was an article in the New York Times this weekend where one of the authors said, "The myth of American innocence." I think it is extraordinarily dangerous for people to say we have not seen this since 1812, because it overshadows, it hides all of the kind of mob violence we have seen in America. Now, it is un-American when we look at our Constitution that says we are to ensure domestic tranquility. That's what our president and others swore to. But this president and the Republicans that have followed him have not been about ensuring domestic tranquility. They've been about ensuring domestic division. And oppressed people in this country know that this is not the first time we've seen mob violence. 1861, 7 states seceded from the Union before Lincoln received his Electoral College vote confirmation. You can go to the violence that took place after the Civil War to deconstruct the Reconstruction movement, the violence that took place against women who were fighting for the right to vote, the violence that took place against white workers and black workers when they were trying to form unions in the early 1900s, the violence in the Civil Rights movement on the Edmunds Pettus Bridge in Birmingham, when churches and sacred spaces were bombed, and when they were raided, and when people were beaten in the street. You can look at the violence that has happened against gay people in this country. So what we have to own is that we've seen a lot of mob violence in this culture. It's in the DNA. It's not all that's in our DNA. We also have the nonviolent movement and nonviolent protesters, but we cannot deceive ourselves that we've only seen this twice in America. People that I know that know the history of this country, my Native American friends who talk about the violence they experienced in their history, when we saw those mobs, it shook something in us because we've seen it together before. Now, it may have just reached the Capitol building, but it has reached our sacred spaces many times before, and we have to face it, own it, and address it. That when you mix racism and lies and this so-called fight against socialism all together, it has and continues to produce a poisonous brew that causes our nation to go septic. And when it goes septic, violence, like somebody whose body is septic, begins to convulse, begins to come out. And we're going to have to deal with this as a nation.
So speaking of that, President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will take office January 20th. In order to deal with this as a nation, as you say, and as a faith leader, what do you think that the administration needs to focus on?
Well, one of the things I said in the sermon just yesterday, we don't need to just fast track impeachment. Sure, we have to do that, but we need to fast track health care. We need to fast track living wage. We need to fast track a comprehensive COVID relief that ensures that everybody, regardless of their race, their color, their creed, are treated right and are lifted up and get vaccines and have rent protections and mortgage protections and sick leave and unemployment. And especially the poor and low wealth among us, who are those that have been made most vulnerable by this matter. We need to immediately have that $15 in a union and a living wage. We need to fast track an agenda to push us forward. We don't just need to arrest the people who are part of the mob. We must do that, but we must arrest this nation with a moral agenda, an agenda that says we are moving forward, an agenda that says we're going to deal with these issues. We must not only call out the racism that was a part, certainly, of those that mob. We must address the systemic racism in our policies, like disparities in health care, the fact that we have been now over 2,000 days and we've still not restored the Voting Rights Act and protected people's voting rights. The nation is not ready for normalcy. The nation is ready for progress, moral progress. And if we create a moral agenda and we fast track it, that will do more to heal this nation. Our Constitution makes it really clear. It says we are to ensure domestic tranquility, but then it tells us how to do that. You must establish justice. You must provide for the common defense. You must promote the general welfare, and you must have equal protection under the law. Those are the only ways you can ensure domestic tranquility. And we have called on the Biden administration to do that. We've met with the domestic policy team. Out of this pain, we must go forth. Let your listeners and viewers understand, even birth is preceded by pain. Birth is preceded by pain. This moment could be a birthing or it could be a destruction. Let it be a birthing. Let it be a birthing. Let it push us to deal with things we should have dealt with a long time ago. And that in itself will lower the temperature and will heal the nation. The body is sick with racism and disparities. Heal the body and the spirit will get better.
Some wise words. Reverend Barber, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you. God bless you. Take care.